Hello everyone, and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to do a deep dive of the Avalanche ecosystem. So let's dive right into it. So what is Avalanche? Well, simply put, Avalanche is a delegated proof-of-stake blockchain. What that means is that to become a validator with the Avalanche network, the requirements are going to be a bit higher than what the average user could contribute. We're just on their website here, and if we scroll down, you can see some stats about the validators. There's actually quite a bit of validators staking on the network, which I was impressed with, certainly much more than Terra. And if you're an average user, you have the option to delegate your stake to different validators to earn a yield as well. It is worth noting that this model is more centralizing than something like ETH2's model, but the advantage for Avalanche is it's much easier to bootstrap a network this way than it would be to achieve full decentralization, which is what ETH2 is hoping to do. Now, the conclusion here is that Avalanche, as I mentioned, is able to achieve a low-cost, scalable, and eco-friendly chain that's a bit less decentralized than ETH2 will be, but it still provides a lot of benefits. So if you're interested in using Avalanche, a lot of folks are going to want to head over to the bridge. So here we are on the Avalanche Bridge, and I must say this is one of the best bridges I've found in the entire crypto ecosystem. So right now I'm on Ethereum mainnet, and basically I can pick any of these assets here. There's a huge list of assets, and I can just easily bridge them over to Avalanche. It only costs me about $5 worth of gas when I did this the other day. And the benefit here is if you bridge over more than $75 worth of assets, you get an AVAX airdrop. Now, the airdrop is going to be a trivial amount, but AVAX is the gas token for Avalanche. So just getting a little bit of this AVAX token means that you can swap whatever assets you bridged over to AVAX so that you can pay for transactions on the network. So this is going to use the same wallet address you have set up on MetaMask. And as you go through this process on the bridge, it's going to automatically offer to configure your MetaMask to use Avalanche, the network itself. So the first platform that you're probably going to use is, I believe, pronounced BenQi. And this is basically going to be the compound or Aave for Avalanche right now. So as I mentioned, lending and borrowing is actually incentivized here. So what I did to test the network out is I bridged over some ETH and some Chainlink tokens. I supplied that on the platform, and then I borrowed against that to test out the network. I did this because I didn't want to sell any of my main assets like ETH, and I was really just interested in testing the network. I didn't think I would actually really be using it for purchasing tokens or something like that. So just looking at the platform here a bit, you can see at the top it says my net APY. So for supplying some assets and borrowing some assets, I'm earning about 18% to do so, which is quite interesting. I think a lot of you are probably bridging over ETH, so I'll just switch over to ETH, and you can see that you're getting 1.16% to deposit that ETH. That ETH is just earning 1.1% because others are borrowing it, but they're also distributing 6.7% APR to suppliers. If we hover over this here, we can see that 6% or so comes from the Chi or key rewards, and about 1% comes from AVAX rewards, which totals 6.7% for ETH. So switching over to the borrow tab, I do want to talk about just ETH here because the rates all are somewhat similar. They fluctuate a bit, but you can see you're spending 5.17% to borrow, but they're making up with that by paying you 23.2%. So it actually nets out that you're getting paid to borrow. Now the difference here is that your borrow APY is going to be taking ETH from you, whereas your distribution APY is going to be giving you these other two tokens, the Chi token and the AVAX token, which you may or may not want to hold. For me, I'm not really interested in trading a 5% yield on ETH for a 20 or so percent yield in these assets that I'm just not comfortable holding. I don't really see the value in holding them just yet. Much happier holding ETH. Now, I also want to point out that this 18% yield or so that I'm receiving is definitely not sustainable. So a lot of value is going to lock into this platform. It's seen as trustworthy. So really a ton of capital is going to come in and bring all of these rates down to the market rates that we see on ETH. So in my mind, and again, I'm not a smart contract engineer, I'm not an auditor, but there's really only about 3 platforms I'd be comfortable putting my money into on Avalanche right now. So I'm just going to go over those a bit and really go over why they're actually not that compelling to me and why I'm really not going to be using the Avalanche ecosystem at this time. So to start us off, I'm going to talk about the platform called Trader Joe. So as you can see here, Trader Joe is kind of the native Avalanche Uniswap equivalent. So basically you're going to be pooling LP tokens, you're going to be farming them and staking them, and that's how you're going to be getting a yield. And I do want to touch on that a bit. So I'm going to go over to the farm tab, and I'm just going to sort these by APR. So highest APR at the top, all the way down to the lowest. And what's really interesting to me here is that for me personally, these yields are just not worth the risk right now. So you can see at the top here, you're going to get really high APRs for these kind of fringe tokens paired with AVAX, which again is the gas token of the Avalanche network, like wet and wrapped AVAX. Again, not sure what that wet token is, but probably not something you want to hold. And you can see there's a ton of those. There's Elk, there's Husky, and again, all of these tokens that you're pairing your Avalanche with are probably going to go to zero. So for me, those are just a no-go right off the bat. But there are some pairs like Joe USDT that you could consider. Joe is the governance token of the Trader Joe platform, which is what we're on right now. And so it's possible that token becomes something, but for me, it's probably not worth the risk to get a 400% APR. Another thing that's important to note is that 400% APR is obviously going to go down as Joe becomes more established and more people deposit liquidity here. So it's only going to last for a couple weeks, but I think most of you are probably here for the stablecoin pairs. So I'll just scroll down and you can see they're the most popular. Their yields have been compressed the most. And the first one I see here is the USDT DAI pair. So as you can see, that pair is getting a 30% APR, which to me is not that special, and it's not worth me using this new and somewhat riskier platform, especially considering that APR is not going to last. So that 30% APR probably only going to last a couple weeks. And for me, although that's on the higher side for stablecoins when there's really little risk there, it's just not worth all of the trouble. So if you divide 30% by 52, you're going to get about 0.58%. Let's just call it 0.6%. So you're getting 0.6% a week to take on this risk, and that APR is going to decline. So maybe you get 0.6% for a week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks. But was that 2% gain worth all of the hassle you took to get on this platform and take all of that extra risk? For me, probably not. Maybe for some of you it is if there's an extremely large position size you're depositing here. But again, I just don't think it's that compelling. I think there's a lot of hype in the Avalanche ecosystem right now, and I think a lot of it is unfounded. For me, the value is really not there unless you're willing to take a risk on a 400% APR like Joe USDT. But again, that's not going to last that long, and for risky assets paired to stablecoins, you can get pretty high APRs on Ethereum mainnet as well. So just a bit confused why there's all this hype around Avalanche. So next up, I wanted to cover Pangolin. Now, Pangolin was a DEX that's been on many chains. It was an early fork of Uniswap, and you can see here they are on Avalanche again with a ton of incentives. So they're really trying to make it happen this time. So if we switch over here, we can see we are on the Pangolin liquidity mining tab, and we'll just go over the rates here and see if there's anything compelling on Pangolin. I've noticed Pangolin doesn't have any stablecoin pools. They're probably not trying to take over the stablecoin market, but you can see they have a ton of incentives, like for instance the AVAX USDT pair. That's probably a very popular one, and that's earning about 32%. Above that actually is the AVAX Pangolin token pair, which is earning 122%. For me, it's not really worth it, especially knowing the yields are going to go down. I really have to hope that these tokens hold up. The yield is certainly not going to make up for any change in the token's value. Looking at this AVAX ETH pair, again, a lot of you probably have exposure to Avalanche, which is great, but this pair is extremely popular, only earning about 11% a year. So is it really worth taking the risk on this platform? That's something you have to decide, but again, for me personally, it's not. So lastly, I did want to cover Yield Yak, which is basically going to be the auto-compounder on Avalanche, which I think is actually a compelling product for Avalanche. You can see they have a very interesting UI. I actually think it's pretty effective. They have about 100 million in TVL, and you can see they do a great job of breaking out the simple APY versus the compounded APY. So this is going to be a great platform if you're not interested in earning those yield tokens, you just want to compound your position, and of course Yield Yak does take a fee. It's also worth noting that these compounded APYs are a bit irrelevant. For instance, let's just look at this Joe AVAX pair or AVAX pair. You can see it's advertising a 2,000% APY and the simple APR is 305%. But as we talked about, all of this is going down. The APRs will not hold up. As more money flows into the ecosystem, the APRs and APYs will go down. So this is not going to last close to a year. Don't expect that. Really expect this to last a few weeks to a month at most before, just a ton of value comes in and you're no longer early into the ecosystem. One little hack here that I thought was great is if you hit all platforms, Yield Yak actually has a great list of all of the platforms that are currently out on Avalanche or are deploying soon. So during my research, I looked at all of these platforms. You can check them all out yourself. Right now, they're a bit risky for me to cover, and it's not something I would highlight on this channel. A lot of these are degen farms with higher yields, but again, you're taking on a lot of risk if you enter something so speculative. So my closing thoughts on Avalanche is that they are doing something a bit unique. Although it is delegated proof of stake and not true proof of stake, it is on the more decentralized side as opposed to something like Terra, so I applaud them for that. The bridge works great, the technology works great, all of the incentives are going to attract a ton of volume, but for me personally right now, I don't see any innovation happening on Avalanche, and I really don't see a reason to have my capital deployed there. The good news is, if you were like me and you just used the BenQi market maker, you didn't sell any of your assets to test out the system, you just deposited ETH or whatever collateral assets you're comfortable holding, and you played around with stablecoins on the platform that way. Now, of course, maintain a healthy collateral ratio on your assets. Don't get liquidated. But other than that, it should be pretty fun to play with Avalanche. The fees are cheap, about $1 a transaction. So I would definitely recommend, if you're an enthusiast in this space, that you just check it out because it's good to learn more about new platforms. Now, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe. And with that said, I will see you all in the next video.